Mark Delaney didn't need to check the clock to know it was after 2 in the morning. The building had a sound at that hour, a hollow, echoing quiet broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of traffic from Colfax Avenue. When noise cut through that silence, it landed hard. The bark came again. Sharp panic, too close. Mark stopped mid-step, coffee cooling in his hand. He'd been a night security guard at the Aspen Ridge Apartments for almost 6 years, long enough to tell the difference between nuisance noise and something wrong. This wasn't a playful dog bark or a careless tenant ignoring quiet hours. This was fear. His radio crackled. "Security, you gonna do something about that dog?" a voice snapped. Apartment 3B chronic complainer, always awake, always angry. Mark exhaled slowly and started down the hallway. His boots echoed against the concrete floor as the barking grew louder, bouncing off the walls like it was trapped. Aspen Ridge wasn't a bad complex, but it wasn't forgiving either. Thin walls. Stricter policies since the last management change. Zero tolerance for unauthorized pets. Zero tolerance for anything that might invite liability. He passed the glowing exit sign near the stairwell, and that's when he saw her. A little girl sat curled on the bottom step, knees pulled to her chest. She wore an oversized hoodie that swallowed her arms, the sleeves dangling past her fingers. Her bare feet were dirty, toes red from the cold concrete. Pressed tightly against her was a small brown dog, ribs visible, fur patchy, eyes wide and darting. The dog barked once more when Mark stepped closer, then stopped. Mark froze. The girl's arms tightened around the dog like she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. Her face was streaked with tears, cheeks blotchy, lips trembling as she tried to stay quiet. She looked up at Mark like someone expecting punishment. For a moment, the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Mark's hand moved instinctively toward his belt, toward the phone clipped beside his radio. That was procedure. Unregistered pet. Minor wandering unattended. After-hours disturbance. One call and it would be out of his hands. That was the job. But something about the way the girl flinched at the slightest movement made his fingers stop short. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't being defiant. She was bracing herself. The red light above the stairwell camera blinked steadily. Recording. Always recording. Mark felt its presence like an eye on the back of his neck. Every second he stood there without calling it in was another second he could be questioned later. "Hey," he said quietly, lowering his voice. "It's okay." The girl didn't answer. She just stared at him, breathing fast like a cornered animal. The dog pressed its head into her chest, trembling. Mark noticed the leash, a thin, frayed rope tied in a knot, looped awkwardly around her wrist. Too tight. Too desperate. Another bark echoed faintly from somewhere else in the building. A neighbor's TV, maybe, or a dog on a late-night walk outside. But the girl flinched again, her shoulders jerking. Mark crouched down slowly, careful not to spook her. His knees cracked as he lowered himself to her level, the smell of cheap cleaner and old carpet filling his nose. "What's your name?" he asked. Her mouth opened, then closed. She swallowed. "Lena," she whispered. Her voice was so small it barely reached him. "That's a nice name," Mark said. "I'm Mark, I work here." Her eyes flicked to his uniform patch, then back to his face. The dog's ears twitched, but it didn't bark again. Instead, it stared at Mark, alert, protective, like it had already decided this was the moment it might have to defend her. "Why are you out here so late, Lena?" Mark asked gently. She hesitated. Her fingers tightened in the dog's fur. He got scared," she said, nodding toward the dog. "And when he barks, people get mad." The words landed heavier than they should have. Mark glanced down the hallway, doors shut, silence. But he knew how thin the walls were. He knew how quickly patience ran out in this building. Complaints turned into reports. Reports turned into notices. "Where's your mom?" he asked. Lena shrugged, eyes dropping to the floor. Sleeping or working, I don't know. Something in her tone told Mark that she wasn't sure either. Another voice crackled through his radio. You better call that in, someone muttered. Manager said no exceptions. Mark turned the volume down. He looked back at Lena. She was watching his hands now, watching the phone clip to his belt. She knew what it meant even if she didn't know the rules. Kids like her always did. Are you gonna call the police? She asked suddenly. The question was barely louder than a breath. Mark didn't answer right away. He thought about the protocol training videos, thought about animal control vans, thought about paperwork and supervisors and the way systems worked, efficiently, impersonally, without room for context. He thought about his own childhood, sitting on a stairwell once, long ago, with a backpack and nowhere to go because his mom's shift had been extended again. He thought about how one call could turn this quiet moment into chaos. No one's in trouble right now, he said finally. Lena's shoulders dropped a fraction, but her grip on the dog didn't loosen. What's his name? Mark asked. Buddy, she said. He's good, he just doesn't like footsteps. As if on cue, a distant door slammed somewhere upstairs. Buddy stiffened, letting out a low growl. Lena hugged him tighter, whispering something into his ear. Mark's chest tightened. He glanced again at the blinking red camera. Management reviewed footage randomly, sometimes weeks later, sometimes never. There was no way to know. If he followed the rules, this would be over in minutes. If he didn't, it could follow him for months. Lena, Mark said slowly, do you live in one of these apartments? She nodded, 3 floors up. And Buddy's not supposed to be here, is he? Her eyes filled instantly. She shook her head. Please, she whispered, he's all I got when she's gone. The words hit Mark like a punch he didn't see coming. The hallway felt colder suddenly. Another bark echoed, this one closer. A door opened somewhere above them. Footsteps, voices, someone was awake now. Mark stood up, heart thudding in his ears. He had seconds to decide. The radio crackled again. You handling that or not? Mark reached for the leash, not to take it away, but to gently loosen the knot from Lena's wrist. Come on, he said quietly, let's move. Lena looked up at him, confusion and fear battling on her face. Where? She asked. Mark glanced once more at the camera, at the hallway, at the closed doors that could open at any second. Just for a walk, he said. And as Lena slowly stood, Buddy pressed close to her legs, and footsteps began descending the stairs above them. Mark knew. Whatever happened next, there was no turning back. The night air hit Mark like a wall as he stepped outside with Lena and Buddy trailing close behind. Denver in December wasn't kind, even at 2:30 a.m. A bitter wind sliced through the thin threads of Lena's hoodie, whipping her hair across her tear-streaked face. Buddy's paws scraped the cracked concrete, nails clicking, as he followed nervously, glancing up at Mark like he was both protector and threat. Mark's chest ached. He was trained to enforce the rules. Rules were what kept a property safe, predictable, defensible. Rules were what separated order from chaos. But tonight, rules felt cruel. He glanced back at the apartment building. The fluorescent stairwell lights flickered against the walls, shadows stretching like hands reaching for them. Inside, cameras watched. Tenants slept, or pretended to. Complaints could be filed tomorrow. Yet outside, in the dim halo of the parking lot, nothing was predictable. Lena shivered. Cold? Mark asked, lifting his jacket collar against the wind. She nodded, her teeth chattering. Her tiny hand gripped Buddy's leash tightly. Hey, Mark said softly, crouching to meet her eyes. You know there's a rule about kids outside after hours, right? And dogs. You need permission for both. Lena looked down, kicking at the cracked asphalt with one bare foot. I know. Mark's voice softened, but his mind raced. Management had been clear. Security officers are expected to report any violations immediately. Pets not registered, call animal control. Children wandering, notify the office. No exceptions. Policies were rigid because one exception could spiral into lawsuits, fines, even his job. And yet he had just made one. "Do you live here?" he asked again carefully. Lena nodded. 350, oh, I forget, apartment. Mark frowned. Memory didn't serve him well that late, but he made a mental note. Apartment 350. Mom likely asleep. Or not, he wasn't sure he wanted to know. A car horn blared in the lot. Lena flinched, Buddy barked sharply, and Mark put a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, let's keep moving." They walked past the rows of cars, the faint smell of exhaust mixing with the cold, dry air. Every step seemed to echo in the silent parking lot. "I shouldn't be out here," Lena muttered. Mark didn't respond. He thought about the rules again, about management's emails, about the consequences if anyone found out. He stopped at the edge of the lot, watching the streetlights cast pale yellow circles on the snow-dusted pavement. A few cars passed, headlights cutting swaths through the darkness. Everything outside the building felt both infinite and fragile. Mark knelt beside Lena. "Listen, Lena, you understand the rules, right? I have to follow them too. That's how this place works." "I know," she whispered, hugging Buddy tighter, "but he's all I have when she's gone." Her words hit him harder than expected. Mark had grown up bouncing between apartments himself, his mother working nights, leaving him with babysitters he didn't trust and stairwells that smelled of cleaning chemicals and lost hope. He knew that loneliness. He recognized the fear in Lena's voice, the urgency, the way she tried to minimize herself so adults wouldn't see the problem. "Sometimes," Mark said slowly, "the rules, they don't cover everything." Lena looked up, confusion etched on her face. "I mean," he hesitated, glancing back toward the building. "The rules are there for a reason, safety, liability, but sometimes you do what you have to do." The wind picked up, tugging at Lena's hair and chilling her to the bone. Buddy whimpered, pawing at the ground. Mark removed his jacket without thinking and draped it around her shoulders. The oversized hood slipped over her head, hiding her face from the wind. She looked up at him, eyes wide, not questioning, not protesting, just trusting. Trust. Mark's stomach twisted. Rules didn't account for trust. Rules didn't account for kids alone in the dark. Rules didn't account for a dog that had saved a little girl from being completely invisible in the world. A sudden clatter from the parking lot broke the quiet. Mark's head whipped toward it. A trash can had tipped over, rolling across the asphalt in the wind. Buddy barked sharply, jumping, and Lena yelped. Mark grabbed her hand and squeezed it reassuringly. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, though her teeth chattered. Mark knew he should turn around, go back inside, make the call, document everything. That's what the rules demanded. That's what management expected. But he couldn't. Not tonight. Not this girl, not this dog. "Lena," he said, kneeling to her level again. "I'm not calling anyone tonight, you understand." Her eyes widened, a tiny cautious hope sparked. "You're not." "No," he said firmly. "We'll get through this, I promise." They walked slowly toward a small courtyard behind the complex, a place where the wind was slightly blocked by brick walls and rows of hedges. Mark scanned the area. Cameras covered the main gates, but the courtyard felt safe. A temporary pocket of peace in the cold night. Lena crouched beside a low brick wall and set Buddy down. He immediately curled around her feet, tail tucked under him, ears flat. Mark studied her. She was so small, so fragile. And yet there was a resilience there, a stubborn spark. He thought about all the tenants who had called in complaints, all the rules, all the paperwork. None of it mattered right now. None of it mattered compared to keeping this child and her dog safe for the night. A sudden shout from a window above startled them. "Hey, what are you doing down there?" Mark stood quickly, putting himself between Lena and the voice. The sound of footsteps followed, a shadow moving against the lighted hallway of the building. The neighbors were awake now, curious, suspicious. Just outside," Mark called back, calm but firm, "nothing to worry about." Lena pressed closer to him, her small body trembling. Buddy growled low, warning. Mark's mind raced. One wrong move and someone could call the police, or animal control, or management. One call and everything could unravel in minutes. And yet, if he didn't act, Lena would be left alone. Buddy could be taken. She could be sent somewhere unsafe. He looked down at her face, tear-streaked, cheeks red from the cold, eyes wide, brimming with fear. Mark's hand found hers, warm, small, desperate. Rules, policies, procedures, they all screamed in his mind. But none of it mattered when he saw the absolute, unshakable need in that little girl's eyes. He took a deep breath. Tonight he wouldn't follow the rules. Instead, he would protect them, both of them. And as the distant footsteps drew closer, as the wind tugged at their clothes and the shadows seemed to lengthen, Mark realized the truth. Sometimes the right choice isn't the safe choice. Sometimes the rules are meant to be broken. He didn't know yet what the consequences would be. He didn't know how management would react, or what the neighbors would think, or what would happen if someone saw him. All he knew was Lena, trembling, clutching Buddy, standing at the edge of a cold, dark world, and that he couldn't let her face it alone. And as the night deepened, the camera blinked silently above, recording every moment, every decision, every heartbeat. Mark knew one thing for certain. When morning came, everything could be different. And for Lena and Buddy, the night had already changed forever. The courtyard was silent now, except for the whisper of wind through the hedges and the soft scrape of Buddy's paws on the concrete. Lena sat on the low brick wall, knees tucked under her chin, hood pulled tight over her face. Mark stood a few feet away, hands stuffed in his coat pockets, scanning the shadows. Every corner of the apartment complex seemed alive with the quiet hum of the night, every lighted window a witness, every distant sound a potential threat. "Lena," Mark said finally, his voice low, careful, "I need to ask you something." She looked up at him, eyes wide, the faint glow of streetlights catching in her tears. "What? Why were you out here alone?" She hesitated, twisting the leash around her fingers. Buddy rested his head on her lap, ears flicking nervously. "My mom, she works nights," Lena said finally, her voice breaking. "Sometimes she sleeps, sometimes she's not here, I don't know." Mark's chest tightened. He knew what that meant, single mother, exhausted, maybe even struggling, maybe worse. "Did something happen tonight?" he asked, keeping his tone soft. She shook her head quickly. "No, Buddy got scared. I didn't want him to get in trouble. People, they get mad, really mad." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was enormous. Mark had seen this before, the way fear silenced children, the way they learned to shrink, to make themselves invisible. Lena wasn't acting out. She wasn't being defiant. She was surviving. He crouched down beside her again. "You know, you don't have to handle everything by yourself." "I have to," she whispered. "Otherwise things get worse." Mark felt a pang of recognition. He'd been there once, staying quiet, staying small, hopping no one noticed. He knew the rules, he knew the procedures, but he also knew the raw, aching reality of a child left to navigate a world of adults who didn't see her. "Tell me," Mark said, keeping his voice low, "what would happen if someone came here and saw Buddy and you?" Lena's lip trembled. She glanced down at the dog, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. They'd take him away. They'd ask my mom questions, maybe call the police. I don't want that." Mark swallowed hard. He had imagined this moment hundreds of times since stepping into the courtyard, each scenario worse than the last. He could call it in. He could follow the rules. He could let the system handle it. But the girl before him wasn't just breaking a rule. She was asking for help in the only way she knew how. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "Not right now." She looked up at him again, hope flickering in her tear-filled eyes. Really? Mark nodded. Really? For a moment, the night seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sound of footsteps, deliberate, heavy, approaching from the far side of the courtyard. Mark's head snapped up. "Who's there?" he called, trying to keep his voice steady. No answer, just the shuffle of shoes against concrete. Lena stiffened, clutching Buddy. Mark moved instinctively in front of her. The rules, the protocols, the paperwork, they screamed in his mind again. Security procedures dictated confrontation, documentation, calling for backup. But the raw, human instinct, older than any rulebook, told him to protect, to shield. A shadow emerged from the dim light near the exit gate. A man, mid-30s, rugged coat, hands stuffed into pockets. He stopped several feet away, squinting in the darkness. "What are you doing out here?" the man barked. His voice was sharp, accusatory. Mark raised a hand slowly. "We're fine, just making sure she's okay, no trouble." The man's eyes narrowed. "A little girl alone, with a dog, you're serious." "She's safe," Mark said firmly. "That's all that matters right now." The man's gaze flicked to Lena. The little girl sat frozen, gripping Buddy's leash, eyes wide. Mark could feel the tension radiating off her in waves. "You shouldn't be out here," the man said, stepping closer. "I could call the cops, or management." Mark squared his shoulders, heart pounding. He could hear the words in his head, call it in, write the report, follow the rules, but he shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Call them, but she's not in danger, not from me, not from Buddy, not right now." The man's brow furrowed. He studied Mark for a long moment, then looked down at Lena and Buddy. Something seemed to shift. Maybe recognition, maybe understanding. "You gonna take him away?" Lena whispered suddenly, clutching the dog tighter. Mark's stomach twisted. "No, not tonight. No one's taking him tonight." The man's lips pressed together. He didn't respond immediately. Then slowly he nodded. "All right, but be careful." Mark exhaled, relief mixed with tension. One confrontation avoided, but the night wasn't over. He glanced back at Lena. "See, it's okay, you're okay." She hugged Buddy tightly, but the fear lingered. What if someone finds out? Mark shook his head. "Then we figure it out together." The girl looked at him, eyes wide with a mix of fear and gratitude. "Together." "Yes," he said, "together." Mark felt a weight in his chest, the kind that only comes from knowing the consequences of choices you can't take back. Every protocol he'd been trained on screamed at him. Every logical part of his brain told him this could end badly. But looking at Lena, at the fragile way she held herself together, he knew the rules were secondary tonight. The wind gusted through the courtyard and Buddy barked once, low and wary. Lena whispered to him, stroking his fur. Mark looked around, noting the faint glow of streetlights, the darkened windows, the silent hum of the city. The night was vast, indifferent. And yet in that small courtyard, something fragile and human existed. A little girl, a dog, and a man who had chosen compassion over protocol. He realized the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about a rule violation anymore. It was about survival. It was about trust. It was about a choice he would have to live with, no matter what came next. And then Lena spoke again, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Are you gonna help me?" Mark's chest tightened. He knew that question carried more weight than anything else, more than rules, more than policy, more than protocol. It was a plea, a demand, a hope. "Yes," he said firmly, "I'll help you." The girl's eyes filled with tears again, but this time there was a spark of something else. Relief, maybe, or belief. Mark looked around the courtyard, at the shadowed corners, at the distant streetlights, at the apartment looming behind them. The night was far from over. The challenges were far from solved. But for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose. And somewhere above, in one of the darkened apartments, a door creaked open. Mark froze, footsteps approaching, slow, deliberate. Lena clutched Buddy's leash tighter, looking at Mark with wide, terrified eyes. He glanced at her, then back toward the approaching shadow. He had no idea who or what was coming, but he knew one thing: whatever happened next, there would be no turning back. The night had already changed everything. Mark's heart thudded in his chest, loud enough that he feared Lena might hear it. The footsteps grew closer, deliberate and echoing across the concrete of the courtyard. Shadows stretched unnaturally under the dim streetlights, and the wind carried a whispering hiss that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Mark instinctively stepped in front of Lena. She clutched Buddy tightly, pressing the dog close to her chest. Buddy growled low, a deep rumble that vibrated through Lena's hands. Mark raised a hand, trying to calm him, but the growl didn't stop. "Who's there?" Mark called out, voice steady but firm. "We're just keeping warm, nothing to worry about." No answer. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. Mark's eyes scanned the shadows. Somewhere just beyond the low wall, a figure lingered, partially hidden. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, probably late 20s. The kind of man who commanded a presence without saying a word. Mark's mind raced. He could retreat, turn back, hand Lena over to the rules he had avoided, and let management or the police handle it. That would be safe. That would be by the book. That would protect his job. But Lena, small, vulnerable, trembling, was standing right there, and Buddy's growl was a warning. The little girl had nowhere else to go. Mark's eyes flicked to the building behind them, imagining the stairwell camera, management emails, complaints, paperwork, and the consequences waiting for him. Then he looked back at Lena, at the dog who had already risked everything to stay by her side, and he knew what he had to do. He exhaled slowly. "No one's leaving this courtyard alone," he said, his voice firm. "Not until I make sure she's safe." The shadow stirred. The man stepped forward into the weak glow of a streetlight. He was young, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "You shouldn't be out here," the man said, voice low, tense. "A kid at this hour with a dog. What is this?" Mark straightened, planting himself firmly between Lena and the stranger. "She's fine, just cold, that's all, nothing else." The man's gaze shifted, then flicked to Lena. She looked so small, so fragile, and yet there was defiance in her posture, a refusal to cower completely. "She's alone," the man said. "You can't just— I could call the cops right now." Mark didn't flinch. He knew the consequences. He knew the rules. But he also knew something older, stronger, and more human than rules: instinct. The instinct to protect. "Call them," Mark said quietly, firmly. "Go ahead, but she's safe. That's what matters right now." The man hesitated. His eyes flicked between Mark and Lena, then Buddy, then back again. He studied the situation, weighing risk versus reality. Finally, he took a step back, hands raised slightly in a gesture of surrender. "Fine," he muttered, "but be careful, don't let her get hurt." Mark exhaled, tension coiling in his shoulders. One confrontation avoided for now, but he couldn't let his guard down, not yet. He crouched down beside Lena again. She looked at him with wide, trembling eyes. Are we okay?" "For now," Mark said, "but we have to keep moving. Stay close, stay quiet, and don't let anyone else see us out here." Lena nodded, hugging Buddy tighter. The dog's tail wagged slightly, a tiny flick of hope in the darkness. Mark led them along the edge of the courtyard, toward a small cluster of trees and shrubs that provided a pocket of shadow. It wasn't much, but it was something, somewhere to pause, somewhere to think. He stopped, letting Lena rest for a moment. The wind tugged at her hoodie again, and Buddy barked at a stray leaf that skittered across the pavement. Mark rubbed the dog's head. "Easy, boy," he murmured. Lena whispered, "Why are you helping me?" Mark glanced at her, unsure how to answer. He could tell her it was his job, but it was. He could tell her it was because he felt sorry, but it wasn't just that either. He inhaled slowly. "Because someone has to," he said finally, "and tonight it might as well be me." She looked at him, trying to understand, and for a moment the weight of the night lifted slightly. But then a distant sound froze them both, a car door slamming in the parking lot, followed by hurried footsteps. Mark's pulse spiked. The night wasn't done. Someone else was awake, watching, judging, ready to call in reinforcements. He scanned the courtyard. They were exposed. There was no alley, no hiding place that would guarantee safety. Decisions had to be made quickly. Mark crouched, whispering urgently to Lena. "We're going to walk. Slow, quiet, and close. You don't run, you don't scream, you follow my lead." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. Buddy pressed close, tail down, ears flat. The dog seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. Mark started walking, keeping to the shadows. Every step was deliberate, every glance calculated. He wasn't just moving them, he was navigating a gauntlet of rules, neighbors, and potential disaster. They reached the far end of the courtyard near a maintenance shed. Mark opened the door slightly, checking the inside. Dim light from a single bulb revealed brooms, tools, and a stack of boxes. Nothing threatening, nothing illegal. A temporary refuge. "Stay here," Mark whispered. "I'll keep watch. No one comes near us." Lena crouched beside Buddy, holding him tightly. Mark stepped outside the shed, scanning the perimeter. The courtyard was silent again, the only sound the distant hum of traffic and a stray dog barking across the street. Mark's mind raced. He could call it in now, and everything would be by the book. But by the book meant breaking the trust he had just earned. By the book meant Buddy could be taken. By the book meant Lena would be alone in a world that had already been too cruel. He thought about his own childhood, about nights spent waiting, shivering, hoping someone, anyone, would notice, about the moments when one small act of kindness could change everything. Mark exhaled, the cold air burning his lungs. He made his choice. He would protect Lena and Buddy tonight, and he would do whatever it took to get them through the night safely. But even as he made that decision, he knew the risk was far from over. Every step he took outside the shed could bring discovery. Every second of hesitation could invite disaster. And somewhere in the darkness above the courtyard, unseen eyes were watching. Mark's chest tightened. He could feel it, the weight of every possible consequence pressing down, the pull between right and wrong, safety and morality. But he didn't step back. He stepped forward. Tonight he would face the consequences later. Tonight he would choose courage. And as the wind howled through the trees, as shadows shifted and distant voices murmured, Mark knew one undeniable truth. Sometimes one choice, one act of defiance against the rules, could change everything. He just didn't know yet how much it would cost. Mark sat on the edge of the low brick wall, his eyes scanning the courtyard, but his mind wasn't on the shadows or the distant traffic. It was on Lena, the little girl, sitting cross-legged beside Buddy, hands buried in the dog's fur, staring down at the concrete as if it held answers she couldn't find anywhere else. "Lena," Mark said softly, "you've been out here before, haven't you?" She flinched at the tone, not of anger but of concern. "Sometimes," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. When she's gone too long." "Gone too long," Mark prompted gently. She hugged Buddy tighter. "She works a lot, nights, double shifts. Sometimes she sleeps all day. Sometimes she's not here. And Buddy keeps me safe when she's not." Mark's chest tightened. He had known instinctively there was more to this than a lost dog or a rule violation. The way she clutched the leash, the way she flinched at shadows, the hollow echo in her voice, they all told a story. And now she was telling it to him. "I understand," he said quietly. "I really do." Lena looked up, eyes wide, shimmering in the faint glow of the courtyard lights. "You understand." Mark nodded. "I've been where you are, not exactly the same but alone, waiting, hoping someone notices, hoping someone cares." Her lips trembled. She buried her face in Buddy's fur and whispered, "I don't want him to get taken." Mark put a hand on her shoulder. "Then he won't, not tonight, not while I'm here." The wind picked up again, tugging at her hoodie, tugging at the small bag she had slung over her shoulder, a threadbare backpack that had seen better days. Mark leaned closer, careful not to frighten her further. "Can you tell me what's in your backpack?" he asked gently. Lena hesitated. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, she unzipped it. Inside were a few essentials: a worn notebook, a small flashlight, a half-empty water bottle, a granola bar, and a tattered stuffed rabbit with one button eye missing. She looked up at Mark, ashamed. "Everything I need, if something happens," she whispered. Mark's throat tightened. She wasn't exaggerating. Every item spoke of a child who had learned to survive alone. Buddy, the notebook, the rabbit, they were her lifeline, her small defenses against a world that had too often overlooked her. "You've been very brave," Mark said, forcing a smile. "Very brave indeed, but you don't have to do this alone." She glanced at him, skepticism flickering across her tear-streaked face. "No one can, they just take him." "No," Mark said firmly. "I won't let that happen, not tonight, not to you, not to Buddy." They sat in silence for a moment, the wind whipping through the courtyard, the distant hum of the city faint but steady. Mark let Lena process, let her trust grow in small increments. Every second he delayed, every soft word, every reassurance, it all mattered. Then a sudden shout from above broke the fragile calm. "Hey, what's going on down there?" Mark's head snapped up. A figure appeared in a window on the third floor, someone leaning out, silhouetted against the dim hallway light. "Nothing," Mark called up immediately, his voice steady but firm. "Just a girl and her dog, everything's fine." The figure hesitated. Shouts and murmurs echoed down the stairwell above. Mark realized someone had already noticed the little girl outside. Someone could be on their way down at any moment. Mark glanced at Lena. Her face had paled, eyes wide with fear. Buddy growled low in her lap, tail stiff. "We have to keep moving," Mark said quietly. "Slowly, quietly, stay close." Lena nodded, gripping Buddy's leash tightly. They moved along the edge of the courtyard again, careful not to step on loose gravel or make noise that would draw attention. As they reached the far side of the courtyard, Lena spoke again, her voice trembling. "Why are you helping me?" Mark exhaled. "Because someone has to, because it's the right thing to do, because I've been in your shoes." She glanced at him, confusion and awe flickering in her expression. "Your shoes." He nodded. "When I was your age, I didn't always have someone to help me. I had to figure things out on my own, and sometimes I made mistakes. Sometimes I got lucky." She stared at him, trying to understand, trying to reconcile the idea that a grown man could ever have been as small and scared as she was now. "You're different," she whispered. "Maybe," Mark said, forcing a small smile. "Or maybe I just remembered what it felt like to be scared, and I don't want anyone to feel that way alone." They paused near a cluster of bushes that offered some cover. Buddy sniffed the air, ears twitching. Mark crouched, motioning for Lena to stay close. "Lena," he said softly, "I need to know the truth. Are you alone at home most nights?" She hesitated, her fingers twined in Buddy's fur. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Sometimes she's here, sometimes she's not. Sometimes the apartment is quiet, too quiet." Mark's heart clenched. He had known it, had sensed it from the moment he saw her on the stairwell, and now she had confirmed it. He reached out, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "You've been carrying this for a long time, haven't you?" She nodded, eyes brimming with tears. I don't want him to leave. I don't want to be alone. He keeps me safe when Mom's not here." Mark swallowed hard. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. He could ignore it, follow the rules, call it in. But that would betray everything he had seen in the last hour. Lena's trust, Buddy's loyalty, the fragile hope in her eyes, it demanded action. "We'll figure it out," Mark said finally, his voice firm. "Together, you, me, Buddy, we'll get through this." She looked at him unsure, her tears falling freely now. "Together." "Yes," he said, "together, and no one is taking Buddy. Not tonight, not ever." The wind shifted suddenly, carrying the faint sound of a car engine starting in the distance. Mark's pulse quickened. The night wasn't over. The danger wasn't gone. Someone, management, a neighbor, the authorities, could still arrive at any moment. He glanced back at the building. Somewhere in the stairwell, doors creaked. Footsteps echoed faintly, moving closer. Mark's jaw tightened. Every choice he made from here on out could change everything. One wrong move and Lena could be discovered. Buddy could be taken. Their fragile moment of safety could vanish. But he couldn't retreat. Not now. Not when the truth of her life, the neglect, the fear, the small victories of survival, was laid bare before him. He squared his shoulders. "We keep moving," he said quietly, "and we stay together." Lena hugged Buddy tightly, leaning against Mark. Buddy pressed his head into her lap, as if sensing the gravity of the night. And for the first time since Mark had found them on the stairwell, he felt something shift. Not just fear, not just responsibility, but resolve. He didn't know what awaited them. He didn't know if management would find out. He didn't know if the night would end peacefully. All he knew was the truth. Lena needed him. Buddy needed him. And he would not let the rules, the procedures, or the fear of consequences stand in the way. The courtyard was silent again, except for the sound of wind and Buddy's low, wary growl. But the tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Mark took a deep breath. He had made his choice. And as the distant city lights flickered in the cold Denver night, he realized that tonight, the smallest acts of courage could ripple far beyond this courtyard. He just didn't know yet how far. The wind howled through the courtyard, carrying with it the distant hum of the city, the faint echo of cars, and, most dangerous of all, the unmistakable shuffle of approaching footsteps. Mark's eyes snapped toward the shadows. A figure emerged from the far corner of the courtyard, tall and broad, face obscured by a hoodie, hands stuffed into pockets. Mark's chest tightened. Lena clutched Buddy's leash, her tiny fingers trembling. Buddy growled low, a warning rumble that vibrated through the night. "Who's there?" Mark called, his voice steady but firm. The figure hesitated. Then, in a voice rough with irritation, a man spoke. "You shouldn't be out here. A little girl alone at this hour, with a dog. What's going on?" Mark's jaw tightened. This was exactly the risk he had feared, the moment when the rules, the policies, the neighbors, the vigilant eyes of the world collided with his act of compassion. "She's fine," Mark said firmly, stepping closer to Lena, placing himself between her and the stranger. "Just cold, that's all." The man's eyes narrowed. "Fine, at this hour, you've got no right." Mark interrupted, calm but unyielding. "I have every right to make sure a child is safe. That's what matters right now." The man's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked from Mark to Lena, then down at Buddy. The dog's ears were flattened, tail stiff, muscles coiled. The man hesitated, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "You could call the cops," he said slowly, almost as a threat. Mark shook his head. "Go ahead, but she's safe, not from me, not tonight." For a long, tense moment, the stranger didn't move. The wind tugged at his hoodie, rustling the edges of his coat. Lena pressed closer to Mark, clinging to Buddy as if her life depended on it, which, in that moment, it did. Finally, the man straightened, hands raised slightly. "Fine, but be careful, don't let her get hurt." Mark exhaled, tension coiling in his chest. One confrontation avoided, but he knew the risk was far from over. Someone else could be watching. Management could be alerted. Any misstep now could unravel everything. He crouched beside Lena, whispering urgently, "We're going to walk. Slowly, quietly, you stay close. Don't run, don't make a sound." She nodded, eyes wide with fear. Buddy pressed against her legs, tense and alert. Mark led them along the edge of the courtyard, keeping to shadows, every movement deliberate. He scanned for any sign of neighbors, tenants, or cameras. The risk wasn't just about being caught. It was about betrayal of trust. One phone call, one complaint, one slip, and Lena's fragile sanctuary would shatter. "Why are you helping me?" Lena whispered, clutching Buddy. Mark hesitated. He could tell her it was his job, but it was. He could tell her it was because he felt sorry, but it was something more, something he couldn't quite put into words. "I've been where you are," he said finally. "Alone, scared, waiting for someone to notice, and I can't just walk away now, not when you need help." Her lips quivered. "Really?" "Yes," he said firmly, "really." They reached the far side of the courtyard near the maintenance shed. Mark carefully opened the door, glancing inside. Dim light from a single bulb illuminated tools, boxes, and cleaning supplies. Nothing threatening, nothing illegal. A temporary refuge. "Stay here," Mark whispered. "I'll keep watch. No one comes near us." Lena crouched beside Buddy, hugging him tightly. The dog's tail twitched, ears alert. Mark stepped outside, scanning the perimeter. Every shadow seemed alive. Every sound, a distant car door, a dog barking across the street, the rustle of leaves, could be a threat. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on him. One wrong move could destroy everything. Yet he couldn't retreat. Not now. Lena's trust, Buddy's loyalty, and the fragile hope in her eyes demanded action. Mark took a deep breath. He had to calculate the risk. Every step mattered. Every decision could tip the balance between safety and disaster. A sudden noise, a bottle clattering near the far wall, made Buddy growl sharply. Lena yelped, pressing closer to Mark. He glanced quickly toward the source. Nothing, just the wind, but it was enough to make the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Mark crouched beside Lena. "It's okay," he whispered. "Just the wind, we're safe." But the truth was, they weren't truly safe. Not yet. Every shadow, every creak of the building, every distant voice reminded him of the precariousness of their situation. The night was far from over. He glanced at Lena. She was shivering, but her eyes followed him, searching for guidance, for protection. Mark's resolve hardened. He couldn't let fear dictate their actions. Not tonight. "We move in 5, he said quietly. "We stick to the shadows, we keep quiet, you follow my lead." Lena nodded, gripping Buddy's leash so tightly her knuckles were white. Buddy seemed to sense the tension, pressing against her legs, growling softly. Mark led them along the edge of the courtyard, careful to avoid loose gravel and puddles that could make noise. Each step felt monumental, each shadow potentially a threat. He felt the adrenaline coursing through his veins, heightening every sense. A figure appeared at the other end of the courtyard, another tenant, drawn out by the barking, or perhaps a curious neighbor. Mark froze, assessing. "Nothing to see here," he called out softly, trying to sound calm but authoritative. The figure hesitated, then moved on, disappearing into the darkness. Mark exhaled slowly, relief and tension mingling. But the risk wasn't over. Somewhere, someone could still see them. Management, neighbors, a passerby. One slip, one noise, 1 second of inattention, and their fragile night of safety could collapse. Mark glanced at Lena. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear but also trust. She was relying on him completely. Buddy's low growl reminded him of the stakes. He had made his choice. He would protect them no matter the risk, but he knew the night could change in an instant. And in that moment, as the wind whistled through the courtyard, Mark realized something. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. He took Lena's hand gently. "We're almost through this," he whispered. "Just a little further, stay close." They moved together, shadows merging with shadows, each step a calculated gamble, each heartbeat a reminder of the danger they faced. Somewhere above, in the darkened stairwell, doors creaked. Footsteps echoed faintly, moving closer. Mark's chest tightened. Every choice now mattered. Every movement could tip the balance between safety and disaster. But he didn't hesitate. He didn't retreat. He stepped forward, pulling Lena and Buddy with him into the next pocket of darkness. The night was alive with risk, but also with possibility. And as they disappeared further into the shadows, Mark knew one undeniable truth. Sometimes, protecting someone means risking everything you have. Tonight, that choice would define everything. By the time the first faint streaks of dawn painted the Denver skyline, Mark had guided Lena and Buddy through the shadows of the courtyard, along hidden service paths, and finally to the small, dimly lit alley behind the complex. The night had been long, tense, and exhausting, yet in its silence lay a fragile victory. They were still together, still safe. Lena slumped against the brick wall, hugging Buddy tightly. Her face, pale and streaked with tears, finally allowed a small smile to surface. "We made it," she whispered. Mark gave a faint smile in return, though he felt no relief. The night had been a battle, yes, but the consequences were only beginning. He had broken rules, ignored protocols, disobeyed management, and in doing so he had put himself in a position where discovery could end his job, or worse. "You're safe," Mark said quietly. "That's what matters." She looked up at him, confusion and hope mingling in her wide eyes. "But what happens now? Won't someone find out?" Mark swallowed hard. He didn't have an answer. In his mind, he ran through all the possible scenarios. Management discovering him on the security feed, the neighbor reporting him, animal control being called. Every outcome seemed worse than the last. But then Lena tilted her head, a question lingering on her lips. You didn't call anyone tonight." "No," Mark said, "not tonight." Her eyes widened. "Why?" Mark paused, searching for the right words. "Because sometimes doing the right thing isn't the same as following the rules. Tonight, the rules would have taken Buddy away. And you needed him more than anyone needed a report. That's why." Lena's eyes filled again, this time with gratitude instead of fear. She pressed Buddy closer, murmuring something to him under her breath. Mark watched, heart heavy but oddly full. The alley was quiet, but the morning had begun to stir. Distant cars rumbled along the streets, and a soft orange glow began to seep through the cracks between buildings. Mark knew that soon someone would notice they were gone. Someone would ask questions. Someone would check cameras. Mark's radio crackled softly, a reminder of the world he had stepped away from. He ignored it. Instead, he looked at Lena, sitting small and vulnerable in the cold light of dawn. The night had been long, filled with fear and uncertainty, but she had survived it. And for the first time, she seemed to realize that maybe, just maybe, someone cared enough to protect her. Mark's phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it, knowing it was likely a message from management or the dispatcher checking on the late-night patrol. Every vibration made his stomach tighten. He had chosen this risk, chosen to protect a child rather than follow procedure. Now he would face the aftermath. But he couldn't focus on that. Not yet. Not while Lena still clutched Buddy, her small frame shaking from both cold and emotion. "Come on," he said finally. "We need to get somewhere safe, somewhere you can rest." Lena nodded and followed him as they moved through the alley, Buddy between them. Every step felt heavy with uncertainty, every shadow a potential threat. They reached a small, nondescript community center tucked between two apartment buildings. It was closed at this hour, but the front door was unlocked, a small blessing. Mark led them inside, carefully closing the door behind them. Lena collapsed onto a row of chairs, hugging Buddy tightly. Mark placed his jacket around her shoulders again, the warmth of the night finally catching up with her body. "We'll figure out what to do next," Mark said quietly. "But for now, rest. You and Buddy are safe here." She looked up at him, eyes wide and trusting. "Safe." "Yes," Mark said firmly, "safe." The morning light grew stronger, spilling through the dusty windows. Mark pulled out his phone, checking messages. One was from the complex manager, security check-in. Another was a string of missed calls from the dispatcher. The weight of reality pressed down on him. He could call it in now, explain, document, take responsibility, but that would mean admitting to breaking rules, potentially losing his job. He glanced at Lena, sleeping fitfully with Buddy curled at her feet. She was small, fragile, exhausted. Mark exhaled, decision made. The rules could wait. Right now, protecting her mattered more than paperwork or consequences. He sat in the corner of the room, eyes scanning the entrance. The aftermath of the night would arrive soon, management, neighbors, perhaps even the police. But he felt a strange calm. He had chosen courage over compliance, compassion over procedure, and in doing so, he had preserved something far more important than policy: trust. Hours passed. The first workers of the day arrived at the community center, noticing the small girl and her dog. Mark introduced them carefully, explaining the situation without giving too many details, focusing on Lena's immediate needs: food, warmth, blankets, small comforts. And then, finally, the manager of the community center approached, a woman with kind eyes who had been alerted to the unusual early morning visitor. She knelt beside Lena, speaking softly and warmly, offering reassurance. Mark watched, feeling a strange mixture of relief and tension. The risk was far from over. Someone could still discover the night's events. But for now, Lena was safe, Buddy was safe, and he had made it through the night without losing the fragile trust he had earned. As he stepped outside for a moment, the morning sun spilling warmth over the city streets, Mark's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was an email from a local nonprofit he had contacted the week before, offering emergency assistance for families in crisis. A small victory, perhaps, but a tangible one. Mark exhaled, shoulders loosening slightly. The aftermath was beginning to take shape, and it was manageable. Later that day, after Lena had been offered a temporary safe space and Buddy had been given a full meal and water, Mark returned to the complex to check on the stairwell where he had first found them. The hallway was quiet, the stairwell empty. The camera still blinked red, recording the mundane quiet of the morning. No one had noticed, no one had filed a report, and yet Mark knew that could change in an instant. He stepped outside again, feeling the weight of the night lifting slowly. Lena's small handprints, Buddy's paw prints in the courtyard, the echo of footsteps. They were all reminders that one choice, one act of courage, could ripple far beyond a single night. Mark's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Lena's mother. "Thank you, I don't know what to say, you saved them." Mark stared at the screen, a strange lump forming in his throat. No disciplinary action had come yet, no reprimand, no questions, just gratitude, raw and unfiltered. He glanced at the city skyline. Denver was waking up. Life would continue, rules would still exist, and consequences would eventually catch up with him. But for now, he had done something that mattered, something that changed everything for one little girl and her dog. And as he walked back toward the community center, he knew that sometimes, the aftermath of a single night could ripple far beyond what anyone could imagine. The choices we make, Mark thought quietly, often define us far more than the rules we follow. And tonight, he had chosen to define himself by compassion. The days that followed blurred together in a whirlwind of small victories and lingering tension. Mark returned to his routine at Aspen Ridge Apartments, but everything felt different. Every footstep in the hallway, every door that opened, every flashing camera reminded him of the night he had made a choice, one that could cost him everything, or save everything that mattered. Lena didn't return to the stairwell that night. Instead, she spent the next few days in temporary care at the community center, a safe haven where staff offered food, warmth, and a quiet space for her to recover. Buddy stayed close, allowed to roam freely in the enclosed courtyard, his tail wagging cautiously as if sensing the fragile equilibrium of the world had shifted. Mark checked in daily, but he maintained distance, letting Lena and Buddy adjust without overwhelming them. Each visit reminded him that small gestures, kind words, a warm coat, a simple reassurance, could ripple far beyond their immediate moment. Then came the day that changed everything again. Mark arrived at the community center to find Lena waiting outside with Buddy, the morning sun warming their small figures. She ran toward him, her hoodie still too big for her frame, hair messy, cheeks flushed from the cold morning air. Buddy barked joyfully, leaping to greet him. "Mark," Lena called, eyes sparkling with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She says we're going to get help, for both of us." Mark's chest tightened. Relief, hope, and lingering tension collided in his stomach. He nodded, kneeling to meet her eyes. "That's great, Lena, really great." Her gaze flicked to Buddy, who seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. He wagged his tail slowly, nuzzling her hand. Mark smiled softly. The little dog had been her anchor through the storm, her constant in a world that often ignored her existence. "Mark," Lena said, hesitating, will you come with us, just to make sure everything's okay?" He shook his head gently, suppressing a lump in his throat. "I can't," he said softly, "but I will check on you, I promise. I'm not going anywhere." She nodded slowly, understanding the boundaries he had to maintain. But the trust in her eyes, the gratitude, the quiet acknowledgement of everything he had done, it lingered like sunlight on snow. The next few weeks were a careful dance of trust, supervision, and gradual reintegration. Social workers worked with Lena's mother, ensuring she had resources for child care, counseling, and stability. The complex manager was made aware of Buddy's presence, but was persuaded by Mark's documentation and advocacy to grant a temporary exception, acknowledging that the dog was essential to Lena's emotional well-being. Mark's choices rippled outward. Rules bent, hearts opened, and lives shifted because someone had taken a risk. He realized that sometimes the consequences of compassion could be as powerful as the consequences of compliance. One afternoon, as Mark returned to his usual security patrol, he noticed Lena and Buddy playing near the courtyard garden. Buddy bounded after a stray ball, ears flapping in joy. Lena laughed, a sound that seemed almost impossible just weeks ago, the fear and weariness replaced by a fragile but resilient hope. Mark paused, leaning against the brick wall, watching them. The sun glinted off his badge, a silent reminder of authority, yet he no longer felt confined by it. Authority, he realized, was only meaningful when wielded with conscience. Lena spotted him and waved shyly. Mark waved back, a small smile tugging at his lips. Buddy barked and ran toward him, tongue lolling, eyes bright. Mark knelt to pet him, feeling the strength and loyalty in the dog's frame. "You two look happy," Mark said softly. Lena grinned. "We are, and it's all because of you, Mark. You didn't call anyone, you helped us." Mark felt a lump in his throat. He shook his head, humility and pride mingling. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said quietly. "I did it because it was right." Her smile widened, radiant in the afternoon light. "Right always feels better," she said simply. Mark nodded. She was right. The choices that terrified him, the decisions that risked his career, had brought more than just safety. They had brought trust, hope, and a chance for a life that Lena had feared she'd never have. But the world didn't pause. Complaints could still be filed. Management could still question his actions. He knew the risk hadn't fully passed. Yet in that moment, watching Lena and Buddy play, he understood that some risks were worth taking. Some nights were worth facing the unknown. And some choices, no matter how small, could change everything. Weeks later, Mark received a message from Lena's mother. "Thank you doesn't seem enough. You saved more than a dog or a child. You saved hope. I can never repay you." Mark stared at the message, the weight of the night finally settling. No one could repay the choice to protect someone against all odds, nor the courage it required. Some acts of bravery were their own reward. Mark returned to the apartment complex that evening, stepping onto the familiar stairwell. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. The hallway lights flickered above, casting long shadows, but he no longer felt the tension of impending confrontation. Instead, he felt the quiet satisfaction of having made the right choice, even when it went against every rule he had learned. As he walked past the staircase where he had first found Lena, he paused. A faint bark echoed in the distance, Buddy's bark, sharp and alive. He smiled, remembering the frightened little dog and the terrified girl on the stairwell. The world had shifted, subtly but irrevocably. A child had been saved, a dog had been kept, and a man had rediscovered what it meant to choose courage over compliance. Mark exhaled, feeling the cold air of the evening fill his lungs. Life would continue, rules would persist, policies would demand obedience, and the world would still be chaotic. But in the small, fragile moments, the acts of bravery mattered most. And sometimes, those acts were all it took to change everything. Mark walked away from the stairwell, the fading light of dusk painting the walls golden. Behind him, Lena and Buddy's laughter echoed faintly, a reminder that one night, one choice had rewritten the course of lives. He knew there would be consequences for his actions eventually. Perhaps a reprimand, perhaps a warning, but the impact of his decision had already taken root in the lives he had touched. In that moment, Mark understood something profound. Life didn't ask for perfection, only courage. And sometimes, the smallest act of courage could change the world, not in grand gestures but in quiet, enduring ways. As he exited the building, Mark glanced back one last time. The stairwell, once a place of fear and despair, now held the memory of hope restored. Lena and Buddy had survived the night. They had survived because someone chose to defy the rules in favor of humanity. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. Mark breathed in deeply, feeling the weight of the night, the choices, and the aftermath settle into a quiet certainty. Tonight he had learned the truth. Courage was contagious. Compassion was unstoppable, and the smallest decisions could leave the largest marks on the world. Lena, Buddy, and Mark, the unlikely trio, had changed everything, not through authority, not through rules, but through the simple, enduring act of choosing what was right. And for Mark, that truth would stay with him forever, a quiet reminder that sometimes, all it takes is one choice to transform a life.